This is The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media. Now, here's Jason Jones.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome to The Jason Jones Show. I am your host, Jason Jones, broadcasting from the beautiful hill country of Texas. It's beautiful, but I should tell you, it's 108 degrees. So if you want to come to the hill country of Texas and tube down our rivers, you want to do that. But if you want to come here and install solar on someone's roof, you probably don't want to do that till the fall. You probably only want to come here to drink beer in an inner tube and float down a river. What am I talking about? I have no clue. All right, today, my guest is one of my favorite people because she is serious and she is intense. Her name is Reggie Littlejohn. She is the founder of Women's Rights Without Frontiers. Reggie Littlejohn has been and is the loudest and most effective and influential voice in the world for the women in China who have been subjected to forced abortion and gendercide. What is gendercide, Jason? Well, when you force women to have abortions and you only allow them to have one or two children, what happens? Well, in China, for generations of forced abortions, generations of one-child policy, you want a son. Why? Because the son that your child is going to have to care not only for you when you're old and your husband, but both sets of parents, right? He's not going to have aunts, uncles, cousins. It's him. And they think a son will do a better job of caring for them in their old age than a daughter. And that leads to gendercide. What a sorrow. But Reggie has been the voice in the wilderness advocating for these women. And some people will say, Jason, there are no more forced abortions in China, Jason. Yeah, there is. And so we're going to talk to Reggie Littlejohn about forced abortion, gendercide, and all the ways that this has impacted society and impacted the vulnerable, from the child in the womb to elderly widows who are left to die alone with no one caring for them. All right, this episode is being brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project. Do you want to stand in solidarity with the vulnerable? Well, then go to thegreatcampaign.org. And it is our mission to stand with the most vulnerable people in the world during the most challenging times. Right now, we're in Ukraine. We're in Afghanistan and Pakistan and other neighboring countries, sheltering and caring for vulnerable ethnic and religious minorities whose world fell apart after the United States ham-fistedly abandoned the country. We've been there since. And what is the mission of the Vulnerable People Project? From the child in the womb to families in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan, we advocate for them. We serve them. And you can too by going to thegreatcampaign.org. We need your help. Become a monthly donor. This episode is also being brought to you by mypillow.com. If you want the best pillow in the world, made in America, well, then you go to mypillow.com, use the code Jones, and you get deep, deep discounts on all of Mike Lindell's products, the best products in the world, made in America. And as we work to decouple our economy from China, we have to make sure that we're waiting for our elected officials to decouple our economy from China. I will decouple my economy from China. Go to mypillow.com. Let the decoupling begin. Use the code Jones. And the CCP is the menace to world order. They've got their allies in neoliberals. Neoliberalism is also a menace. But if you want the best place to start your day, the best newspaper in the world, it's Epoch Times. And you go to ireadepoch.com, use the code Jason Jones, and get that great deal on your digital and print subscription. And all you need to know about Epoch Times is that the CCP sees the Epoch Times as the greatest threat to what they're trying to do in the United States. Why? Because Epoch Times is onto them, and Epoch Times is fearless. They are fearless in standing up to the CCP. So go to ireadepoch.com, use the code Jason Jones, and fight back for freedom with the best newspaper in the world. All right, on with the interview. Reggie Littlejohn, Women's Rights Without Frontiers, on the Jason Jones Show. Aloha, Reggie Littlejohn. Welcome to the Jason Jones Show.
Hey, Jason. Thank you so much for having me on.
Now, I have a confession to make for you and the audience. Okay, Reggie, you're a part of, you were on the pentathlon of podcasting as we boycotted the Beijing Olympics. And I thought that was something, 16 days in a row of podcasts. Well, now we are doing 49 days in a row or so because my producer had to go on vacation. But in about 50 days, we're going to do 49 episodes celebrating the overturning of Roe. So this is historic, and I had to have you on. But
I appreciate it.
But here's a confession. My neighbor is cutting down his tree right now. Can you hear it? Can you hear it? Can you hear my neighbor cutting down the tree?
No, so that's good.
Well, good. And tomorrow, this is true. My office is soundproof. Everything is soundproof but my windows. Tomorrow, I get soundproof, bulletproof windows in the studio. Not that I think anyone's going to shoot at me, but it just is what it is.
I was going to say, why do you need bulletproof windows, Jason? What are you doing?
I'm in the mafia.
Oh no!
I'm trying to. You never know. We're going to the mattresses here. Going to the mattresses. No, I wanted a soundproof windows. And they said nothing will get through there, not a bullet, not a sound. But they go in tomorrow, and hence my neighbor cuts the tree down today. But we're going to go forward with this, Reggie Littlejohn, because we're doing 49 days in a row of podcasting in the wake of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Now, to my surprise, every day the shows are getting a ton of downloads. It's a lot of shows. People are listening to every show. I really was thinking that my audience would be 100 years from now. Scholars would find this treasure trove of brilliance of the activists that I'm interviewing, and it'll be like the gold mine for them. So that was the whole idea. And the reason, of course, why we needed Reggie Littlejohn on is because you are the founder of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, and you have been the leading voice in the world for women in China that have to face forced abortion, that are pressured into sex-selective abortions. And then you've been the one to let us know on all the ways that this is impacting the vulnerable, not just pregnant women, not just their preborn children, but how it's impacted the vulnerable in China, and how it just goes back, how the elderly are suffering today goes back to forced abortion since the late 70s. So now, in the United States, we see the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Where are we now in China? You'll hear people say there are no longer forced abortions in China. There are no longer sex-selective abortions in China. Really, where are we? Is that a thing of the past, or is this a present-day reality in 2022 in China?
Yeah, the reason people say that they're not having forced abortions anymore is because the way that the new three-child policy was announced was that it was basically announced that China abandoned, one-child policy or two-child policy. And so it made it sound like they're abandoning coercive population control altogether, and that is totally not the case. So the most obvious place where this is still happening is Xinjiang, where the Chinese government is committing genocide against the Uyghur people. And some very troubling things are happening there. I mean, obviously the genocide is horrendous, and you can't get information directly out of Xinjiang, but people who have escaped have talked about forced abortion in the internment camps, forced sterilizations. And then what they did, Jason, is when China moved, even under the one-child policy, rural minorities were allowed to have 3 children. So people in Xinjiang, a lot of them were allowed to have 3 children, even under the one-child policy, because there was an exception for people who are rural and ethnic minorities. Then when China came through with a 2-child policy, this was in 2016, they said, we have a 2-child policy now, and you have 3 children. And the Uyghurs would say, well, but we came in under an exception. These are legal children. And so then they would say, well, now we're imposing the 2-child policy all over China. It's going to be uniform all over China, and therefore your 3rd child is illegal, and therefore either you have to pay this enormous fine, or we're going to take you and put you in an internment camp. And lots of the parents of 3 children, that was the excuse that they used to put them in the internment camps.
This is really unbelievable. So
Well,
they call them black children, like black market children, children that are outside of the law, children that are outside of, they're like the untouchables. They're right, and they're oftentimes driven into sex trafficking. They're destitute. They become homeless. They're literally forced to live outside of society.
Right, but these are children that were born legally that were afterwards declared illegal because China went from a one-child policy to a two-child policy, and they were third children, and they were third children legally under the one-child policy, and then under the two-child policy, they declared them illegal, which just shows just how arbitrary they are. And listen, Jason, I'll tell you something else. What they would do is they would take the father of the family and put him into an internment camp, and then they would take a Han Chinese man, and move him into the home with the mother. So you get a situation of rape, and he's spying on her to see if she does anything like pray or, I don't know, wear certain clothing that would indicate that she was a religious extremist, and then they put her in the camp also, and then they would take the kids.
Owning a Quran or a Bible would have you labeled a religious extremist, just simply owning one.
Well, and not only that, but like having a beard of a certain length, wearing a certain kind of, headscarf or whatever. So this is the thing, is that absolutely, and according to the Congressional Executive Commission on China report that came out earlier this year, forced abortion is continuing for sure in Xinjiang. And then in other places in China, the new 3-child policy, the rule is every couple is allowed to have 3 children. And so, number one, the Chinese Communist Party is still telling people, how many kids they can have. And it's still officially illegal to be unmarried and be pregnant. And 4th children are still officially illegal. So China has the ability legally to force single moms and 4th children to be aborted. And not only that, but in China, the central government does not have the kind of power that, for example, the U.S. central government has, or the Supreme Court, or something like that. If a decision comes down from Congress, or if a decision comes down from the Supreme Court, it's applied nationally. And in China, the provinces, they aren't, they have provincial governments that can follow or not follow the rules. And so, the one-child policy was a very big moneymaker for a lot of these provinces, because you could find women who were illegally pregnant, you could find women who had more, too many kids, etc., and that's a big moneymaker. And so we don't really know what's going on all over China, because it's such a big country and because the laws are not uniformly followed.
This is really unbelievable. So this is news to me about the children that were already permitted to be born are now labeled illegitimate children.
Well, this is the thing, is that, and this happened towards the end of the Trump presidency. I was seeing articles come through where they were saying, where the Chinese Communist Party was saying that having 3 children was an indication of religious extremism.
I mean, it is in my case. I'm a religious fanatic and I have 7 kids. I'm a religious extremist times. I'm two religious extremists in one.
Well, yeah, I mean, so 4 of your kids would not be allowed to exist even under the 3-child policy. I'm a 4th child, so I would not have been allowed to exist under the 3-child policy. I would have been forcibly aborted. So there's that's going on, and then there's also a push because China has finally figured out that they have really that they're facing a demographic disaster because they don't have enough women, they don't have enough young populations to support their old population. That's why they moved to a 3-child policy, and now they're trying to pressure couples into having 3 children. So this is another. It's just like whatever flavor the country has in terms of, you know, what they see their need to be for children. They're just pressuring women either by forced abortion to not have that many kids that they want, and then or through, you know, pressuring them to have more kids. So anyway,
isn't that the irony, Reggie? And the thing you've always been adamant with me about is to not to recognize that what you do is not what I do, that you're really about advocating for women. And we hear a lot from the left in the United States, this talk about forced birth. Well, regimes that force births sooner or later will force abortions, and regimes that force abortions will sooner or later force pregnancy. And so are we approaching a point in China where women will be coerced to become pregnant, to carry children?
I don't think it can be taken off the table. You know, the Chinese Communist Party is all about coercion. I mean, they do not believe, they are officially atheistic. They do not believe that human beings were created by God in his image. They believe that human beings are there to serve the state. And whether that's by having few kids or having many kids, the woman's body is in the domain of the state in China. So I don't think you can rule it out that would happen. So then the other thing is that even under the three-child policy, or perhaps even especially under the three-child policy, gendercide, the sex-selective abortion of baby girls, will continue, because what demographers have found, and this was in the past before I got involved, started hammering them on their numbers, but there was an article, it must be 10 years ago, in the British Medical Journal that found, interestingly, that under the one-child policy, if the first child was a girl, the couple would let her live, you know, just sort of one and done. And if it was a girl, whatever. Then they found out under the two-child policy that where the first child was a girl, that the second child, the gender just leaped up in terms of the number of boys over girls. And so this is the thing, is that in China, people don't want to have second children. They certainly don't want to have third children, because it's very, very expensive to raise a kid in China. And so, my concern is that the main couples that are going to be willing to have a second child are ones who had a girl for the first child, and they're willing to have a second child if it's a boy. And certainly the couples who are willing to have a third child, I think probably a majority of those will be couples who've had two girls, and they're determined that last child will be a boy. So it actually exacerbates the whole sex-selective abortion and baby girl problem.
Do you find women as well are on board with the gender selection? You know, like with female genital mutilation, so many times it's women forcing young women to undergo this female genital mutilation. Do you find that it's women as well? Are they participating in this gender selection of abortion? Do they too prefer boys over girls? Generally, I know it's a general question, but
yes, but it's not the mother of the child. It's the mother-in-law. It's not the mother. It's not the maternal grandmother. It's the mother-in-law on the man's side.
Because they want the father's name, the husband's name, to go forward. Is that what it is, or to care for them?
Right. Well, it's not only that, but they want. Traditionally, boys support their parents in their old age, and so that's why they want boys, because if you can only have one kid, you want it to be a boy, and there are couples who have felt that that they have a choice of either committing gendercide, sex-selective abortion of baby girls, or becoming really impoverished in their old age if they don't have that boy that they need. And also, unfortunately, just culturally, boys are just way more prestigious than girls. I mean, I've heard accounts where when a boy is born, they have like red firecrackers, and then if the girl is born, it's like you get you hang a piece of coal out, out your door, Or I remember hearing a woman saying that if you have a boy, your friends will take you to lunch, and if you have a girl, you have to take your friends to lunch. I mean, it's just it's terrible. So we've got this Save a Girl campaign in China. We're the only organization in the world that has boots on the ground inside of rural China, saving baby girls. And part of what we do is when our network finds out about a woman who is pregnant with a girl or who has had a girl, and who is being pressured either to abort or abandon or give away her baby girl, we'll just go to her door and say, congratulations on her daughter. Girls are as good as boys, and we will give you a monthly stipend for a year to empower you to keep your daughter. And these women, the message that girls are as good as boys is something that is not heard in the Chinese countryside. I think that it's probably the first time that a lot of these women have ever even heard that. And then the money enables them to go back to their mother-in-law and their husband. So the husband doesn't want to directly pressure his wife to abort their baby girl because he doesn't want to deal with the backlash from his wife. But he stands aside and lets his mother do it. All right. So the woman is able to go back to the husband, go back to the mother-in-law and say, look, I can't abandon this baby girl. She's a lucky girl. Look, she's already bringing money into the family. And we've saved, I think about.
She's a lucky girl. She's a lucky girl. I love that.
Right. So you use the superstition around luck to counteract preference.
My mother-in-law is Chinese. I know all about Chinese superstition. Yeah, I love that. You've met my mother-in-law, who I adore, and she listens to this podcast, and I have the best mother-in-law in the world, for real. But she's into a lot of that. So I can see that this lucky girl. It's really hard. We're working in Afghanistan right now, and we're rescuing a lot of young women, and it is strange for us. I mean, I have 4 sons and 3 daughters. And just as a father, you love all your children the same, but there's there's something special about daughters. It's just almost impossible for us to imagine not cherishing your daughters the same as you cherish your sons. It's strange. It's really hard to wrap your mind around. But you may not want to go there. Do you think it's in our culture, it's really the fruit of the Christian teaching of the dignity of the woman? All right, everybody, what you're not going to realize is, because my producer is going to make this seem seamless, but I want you to know, we had to stop recording because Reggie is there's a tornado warning, and her lawn chair got blown up against the window. Trees are falling, and we stopped recording, and now we're starting recording again. It was seamless, but I just want you to know that's what just happened. Okay, so Reggie, the question I asked you.
That's a slight exaggeration, but yeah, okay.
That's what I did.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, you sounded like the world was falling in around you all of a sudden. So Here we go. Okay, so the question I had asked before the massive gust of wind almost blew a tree down is, the work that we're doing in Afghanistan, the work that you're doing in China, as a father with all, with 3 daughters, 4 sons. My daughters are my princess. I actually call them princess. Like, people think my daughters' names are all princess. Like, what's your daughter's name? Because they're my prince. Is it the gospel's teaching of of the dignity of women that's really unique? And so, or is this just the fruit of totalitarian socialism on Chinese culture, or is this rooted in something pre-communism?
Well, I think that I think it's pre-communism because even before communism, they were binding feet, in China. So I don't really know, where this idea comes from that women are somehow less than men. But I will say this about Christian culture. Versus the Chinese Communist Party culture, which is that, in Christianity, we believe that every human being is created by God in his image. And in Chinese culture, they are officially atheistic. And so what that means is that it's a completely materialistic view of people. so that like a baby, a fetus, a baby in the womb is worthless because the only thing that matters is what can you contribute to society. So that the most vulnerable are worthless. So you have the fetus, the baby in the womb, and then you have the elderly, which are also really, the Chinese Communist Party just destroyed Chinese culture. Because in the past, the elderly were venerated, and also they had these big families, like they're agricultural communities, and a couple would have a large family because they needed a lot of kids to farm the land, and then those kids would have lots of kids, so that by the time the original couple got old, that they would have an extended family to protect them and to take care of them. And now it's like, if you're not contributing to society, you're just a burden. And so that's why I think one of the reasons that the senior suicide rate in China has skyrocketed, and especially women and elderly widows are committing suicide because their husbands have died, they have no means of support, they don't have an extended family to support them, they have no one to support them, and their society views them as being just a burden. Like we have a Save a Widow campaign where we will go to widows and just say, you're a human being created by God in His image, and we're going to support you. And these women, they look at us like, are you crazy? What do I need to do to in return? And we say, you don't need to do anything in return. And no one has ever said that to them. No one. You think of these women. One of our widows is old enough that she actually had her feet bound. So these women saw the Chinese takeover. They've lived through the Great Leap Forward. They've lived through the Cultural Revolution. They've lived through the one-shop house. They've lived through just some of the most brutal experiences in human history, and certainly in Chinese history. And no one has ever said to them, you are a human being created by God in His image, and we are going to give you support just because you need it. And a lot of these widows are coming to believe in Christ. Because our field workers are Christians, very passionate Christians, and the same with the mothers of the baby girls, So it's a beautiful thing that's happening over there. And if your listeners are praying people, I would ask that you would pray for the safety of our field workers. I mean, we've been doing this for close to 10 years. Next year, our network will be 10 years old. And people say, what kind of encounters have you had with the authorities? And we just say, by the grace of God, we have had no encounters with the authorities. Because what the field workers do is very dangerous. China does not like people working with foreign organizations. So please pray for the safety of our field workers and for the widows, they would be encouraged, and for, the mothers of these baby girls and for the baby girls.
Reggie, why I adore you and I admire you so much is, first of all, you're doing what the gospel calls us to do, which is to serve widows and orphans, because that's what a child that's suffering violence from forced abortion is. It's orphaned before they're even born. And these widows, and to think many of these widows, I'm sure, were victims not only of the Cultural Revolution, but of also forced abortion. So they have all of those scars, all of their wounds, because they were forced to abort their children. Now they're left without anyone to care for them. And there's not the sort of mainstream women's organizations and human rights organizations, for some reason, have a blind spot to China. And China's allowed to do whatever it wants and never be called on their crap. And the one thing I'd say is, when you started 10 years ago, the CCP is it's a different country today than it was 10 years ago, isn't it? It's a much more dangerous country today for the vulnerable and for those people working for you than it was 10 years ago. Have you noticed the change, this descent into a very dangerous and aggressive totalitarianism?
Well, I mean, okay, put it this way. 10 years ago, I think it was more aggressive in terms of the forced abortions up to the 9th month of pregnancy. Today, it's more aggressive in terms of the totalitarian surveillance state. Because in China, they have something I am trying to prevent from coming to America. And this is a whole nother thing that I do, which is that they have something called the China Social Credit System. And it could easily come to America. And so what this is China has a database that is centralized that tracks everything about a person. So it's on your cell phone. So of course it tracks your health status. Have you had COVID? Have you had COVID or not? Have you had the vaccine or not? Okay. So that's the excuse for it. It's like a COVID health pass, but it's also tracking all your social media posts, real-time geolocation, so it knows exactly where you are, facial recognition, all your social media posts. So if you say anything critical of the government, it's going to be known immediately. And it also attaches your entire medical history, your entire criminal history, where you work, where you live, and it's attached also to your credit cards and your bank account, so that if you say something that's a dissenting opinion, you could end up getting cut off from your credit cards and your bank account. And that will, that will paralyze you. And so this happened recently, like in June in China. There are some banks that cut people off from their funds. I mean, what happened is these poor people, some of them had their life savings in these banks, and they checked their balance, and all of a sudden their balance is zero. There's somebody who had like $800,000, his whole life savings, all of a sudden zero. And so then they have no money. And so they were going to go to Shanghai to protest. And on the day of the protest, their health pass went from green to red so that they couldn't get on the train. And that was the way that they paralyzed them and stopped the protest. And the way that could come to the United States is through these, any kind of digital ID, any kind of mandatory digital ID, like a vaccine passport, a smart health card. That is the platform that could incorporate all the same functionality of the China Social Credit System. And then, if we take a position that's contrary to the government, like, for example, questioning the safety or the efficacy of the vaccines, or questioning, whether the 2020 election, whether there might have been fraud, whatever is counter to the narrative, we could get shut down just as easily if we allow these mandatory vaccine passports or digital IDs to go through. So I have a whole other website called stopvaxpassports.org that
we're gonna have to do a whole show on that, because tyranny is coming in a different form, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, but we got to stop it. We got to stop it. I'm not going to say it's coming, but I am going to say that if we don't stop it, it will come. It will come.
Yeah, I like that. If we don't do something, it's inevitable. But we will do something, so it's not going to happen. I mean, it's
right.
like a Will Smith movie. It's unbelievable. The one good thing, though, is if I get a social credit score, it'll make my bank credit score look good. It'll be like, I'll say, hey,
I don't
babe,
think so, Jason.
Honey, look, I got 630 is my credit score here on Experian, but my social credit score is 330. So if you compare it, it's not so bad, really.
I see what you're saying. I think you're going to have I think your social credit score is going to be about zero. Because you're totally counter narrative, to the government.
Well, look, let's be honest. The vaccines are no longer safe. We can say that now. Before we could say we don't know, but now we know. Everyone knows they're not safe. Even Facebook no longer says they're safe and effective. It just says for more information. They just kind of removed the safe part off. Nothing to see here. Bill Gates just recently came out and I think it's 92nd Street Y, that podcast, that speaking of venue and event in New York, where he came out and said, we really overreacted to COVID. That was a mistake. Oh, okay. Glad to hear.
I didn't know he said that.
Yeah, it was the 92nd Y. Was it 92nd Street Y? I think it's called. It's they have great talks. I always listen to them. And Bill Gates came out and said, it's kind of like the flu, maybe a little different. We did the best with what we know. Move along. Take this vaccine, which we now know is unsafe. Obviously, Johnson & Johnson, you can't get it anymore. Not because it's great for you. I just was talking to my friend. He says his brother got the Johnson & Johnson because he wanted the one shot and done. and had blood clots almost immediately. And that's why I was taken off the market, right? So anyway, I'm glad you're doing that because I just went to Europe. Do you know when we were rescuing Afghans, trying to get them across the border, they were asking for COVID tests within the past 24 hours. For refugees fleeing the Taliban in the midst of a collapsing regime, they were asking for COVID tests. When we were shuttling Ukrainian women out of the country, we had to hustle to get them vax passes or COVID tests. And otherwise, they would have been left to die, I guess, for their own good, because we care so much about them. We know you're fleeing the Russian army, but may we please see your vax passport, please? It's really, so I think the work you're doing there is unbelievable. Is it because of your work in China that helped you see this before the rest of us?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's because I have been working in China for the last, 12 years or something, that I have radar about the way that totalitarianism works. And so I saw this coming and just started sounding the alarm. So I'm going to continue to sound the alarm because I don't want the United States, to turn into Shanghai, where they locked everybody down and they, people were screaming, and it was just, it was unbelievably horrific. So, so that's my other thing, that stopvaxpassports.org. But with respect to what you had said about wanting to talk about Roe v. Wade and the aftermath, and talking to me about forced abortion and sex selective abortion of baby girls in China, I would encourage people to go on to my website, womensrightswithoutfrontiers.org, womensrightswithoutfrontiers.org. And if you click there's a little red button on the right that says Save a Girl, and another one that says Save a Widow, and you can see videos, short videos, like 3 minutes each, of the faces of the babies that we're saving, faces of the widows that we're saving, and hear more about that tremendous work, because it's the only way that you can actually get your funds into the hands of a mother of an at-risk girl or an at-risk widow. Some of the baby girls are not at risk to forced abortion, or sex selective abortion or abandonment, but just that their parents are so poor that they're thinking about giving her away, like that. The mother is getting pressured to just give her daughter to a childless couple, and she doesn't want to. She wants to keep her daughter. These women are just heartbroken. Or another thing that's really common where our network is that these women are incredibly stressed out just through poverty, so they can't produce milk and they can't afford to buy milk powder. And that's another reason that they would, think about giving.
And their baby powder is horrible, right? It's with the melamine scandal, and they're afraid to even give their children baby formula that's produced in China.
Yeah, but so that's another situation, just abject poverty where we feel that the baby girl is at risk. So another situation is where the mother, where they're so impoverished that the mother feels that she has to leave her daughter with the grandmother or somebody else and move to the city to make money to support the daughter. It's like, no, you should be able to raise your own daughter. So we'll give you $25 a month. It's not that much money to us, but to them it's a huge amount of money that enables them to stay with their daughter. So this is a way that we are keeping families together in China.
Can I ask you a tough question?
Sure.
Okay.
I might not answer it, but you can ask me.
Okay, so Women's Rights Without Frontiers. This is something I've been thinking about a lot. The idea of rights for women in a lot of traditional societies, or in the Orwellian society that is the CCP, strikes against the culture or the narrative. And it has a disruptive, advocating for the rights of women has a disruptive effect on traditional cultures. Also, what is contained in this idea of women's rights, I, as a Catholic, may have a different understanding of what human rights are, what's the source of human rights, and what does it look like. Maybe a neoliberal or a Marxist, they would have their own sort of understanding of human rights. How do we, those of us who seek to protect the vulnerable from violence like forced abortions, gendercide, have you, you've been doing this now for a long time. Have you thought about, like, it is disruptive, and what is the balance as we seek to protect women from violence, protect the preborn child from violence? But we're also conscious of the work that we're doing is in a way disruptive to traditional societies. Or like China, a society that's been eviscerated, the traditional society was eviscerated, and what's left in its place is just armed ideology.
Right, so that's the key, Jason. You know, talking about women's rights in China is not disrupting traditional society, because they destroyed traditional society on purpose during the Cultural Revolution. It's disrupting the Chinese Communist Party official atheism and using women's bodies as an instrument of the state. That's what it's disrupting. You know, it's really pathetic, because there are basically no NGO women's rights organizations in China, because the Chinese government doesn't like anybody to be organized if they're not the Chinese government. So I think it was, I don't know, like 5 years ago, I'm sure you heard of the Feminist Five, five Chinese women who all they were trying to do was come against sexual harassment on public transportation. I mean, it's hard to imagine a less controversial issue. That's all they wanted to do. And they were all detained and arrested. And for no reason other than, I mean, everybody was scratching their heads. It's like, why did the Chinese Communist Party do that to these women? The Chinese Communist Party is against sexual harassment on public transportation. Why did they detain them? And the only reason I can think of is that the Chinese Communist Party is against anyone who does anything, takes an active role against anything that's not the Chinese Communist Party. So that's why I think they did
even
that.
If it's something, I mean, obviously, a Nazi would be against sexually harassing women on a train, right? I mean, it's something that ideology you think wouldn't touch. So you think that the CCP would want order and on their trains, and they wouldn't want women sexually assaulted on their trains, like it's you know, they're in the wild. But what you're saying is it's just they don't want centers of power, organization, or influence anywhere outside of the party.
Right, exactly. So, like, let's say that some people organize, a group that says, we love Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, I mean, it'd be hard to find something that they, that they wouldn't agree with more, right? And I believe it would be shut down just because they were organizing. They don't want anybody to be taking the initiative. They don't want anybody to be organizing anything if it's not them. It's a threat, even if their message is we love, Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party.
So where are these Feminist Five? Do we know where they are?
I think that they're out of jail at this point. So
now, on a similar note, tennis superstar Peng Shuai, she was disappeared. The party waged a war against her. To me, it's the creepiest thing that has ever happened. And, I just can't imagine how the whole world is just pretending that this young woman who was sexually assaulted, Peng Shuai, and then was just disappeared and made to read an Orwellian denouncement of herself and then disappeared again. Why would the CCP stand with one cadre who committed a crime against this woman instead of prosecute him? And instead they risked. But yet at Wimbledon, Chinese athletes are allowed to participate. There's silence from ESPN and Wimbledon, the feminists, the Me Too movement. But what did the CCP have to gain from waging this war against Peng Shuai?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, again, the guy that she accused of raping her was a major. He was retired, but he was one of the most. I think he's a member of the Politburo. I mean, he's really, really powerful. So of course they're gonna just, circle wagons around him and crush her. And to their credit, the Women's Tennis Association stood behind her and said that they were going to stop having, they would stop having matches in China because they were standing behind her, and they have continued to say that they're not clear that she's safe. Now, I haven't looked that up for a couple months, but last time I looked, they were still saying we don't know where she's at.
It's still not clear that she's safe. It's frustrating to me that Russia and Belarus, for obvious reasons, couldn't send athletes to Wimbledon, but China could. And I just think if we were serious, until Peng Shuai is released, there would be no Chinese athletes participating in any international sporting competition, I would think. And this is in solidarity with those athletes. This is for those athletes, for their safety. We're standing with them. Therefore, we're not going to let you compete because one of yours is suffering in ways we cannot even know. And can you imagine? The whole world is watching. It's like, we just, in Mass this past Sunday, the gospel reading was the Good Samaritan, right? And all those people walked by, and then the lowly Samaritan gave aid. The whole world is watching what's happening to Peng Shuai. The whole world is watching what's happening to the Uyghur. The whole world watched what happened to Chinese women with forced abortion. And we just are walking by. It's so I can't wrap my mind around it. Is it frustrating to you that these clear and obvious crimes against humanity that the CCP is perpetuating, the establishment and the mainstream media just continue to ignore and cover for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to go, but I agree with you, and I think that there's a lot of Western society that is very deeply compromised. So who knows how much. Somebody needs to do a study, or maybe it's been done about how much the CCP owns of our media. What kind of advertising they do there. What some of the big corporations that advertise on the media, how much how connected they are in China, where the supply chains are coming from, et cetera. So that's what I think it is. I think it's an economic interest, and that's the reason that people are so corrupted. But anyway, Jason, I wish I could talk to you longer, but I gotta go.
I'm going to pray that you don't wake up in Oz. Has the wind stopped?
It's calmed down a little bit, but it was weird because there was a second big gust as well. That was very alarming. That happened while we were talking. But it seems calmer now. I think maybe it passed over.
Yeah, I love, after living 31 years on the mainland, what I love most about living, after 31 years on Oahu, what I love most about living on the mainland is thunderstorms. Just it'll be bright and sunny and the sky will be blue, and then 10 minutes later, these huge gusts of wind come, the sky is pitch black, and rain is sideways. I love that.
Yeah. Well, that's what they say, when you live on the East Coast, if you don't like the weather here, just wait 10 minutes,
Well, there you have it.
It's very cool.
Reggie, before you go, one more time, give us your website.
Okay, Women's Rights Without Frontiers.org. That's Women's Rights Without Frontiers.org.
All right, I'm going to have that in the show notes. Reggie Littlejohn, thank you for coming to the Jason Jones Show, and it was a privilege to hang out with you in the midst of this storm.
Yeah, it was wonderful, Jason, and it's always a pleasure and a privilege to speak with you.
Keep up the great work. Aloha.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone, that was the great Reggie Littlejohn. And do you know one of the great things about the overturning of Roe versus Wade is here's how it's going to play out, guys. We will see a 10-year march to what I believe will happen will be a human life amendment to the Constitution. And life will be protected from biological beginning through natural death from Maine to Miami, from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, to Honolulu. And then, by God's grace, we can be that city on a hill, exemplifying to the world how a regime should protect and order itself, how governments should order itself around serving the most vulnerable. There are only two ways that a community can order itself. That is around the systematic exploitation and destruction of the weak and the vulnerable, CCP. The CCP is that. It is the perfect regime. If you think a regime should be ordered around exploiting the weak then you should move to China and submit yourself to the CCP, because that's what that regime is about. If you think that a regime should order itself around acknowledging the inviolable dignity of the human person, and the role of government is to protect specifically the most vulnerable, then look to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Read the writings of George Mason, John Adams, John Quincy Adams. Look to our founding. And if you were raised in America and born after 1960, you were raised to hate your country and to look at the contradictions of the American vision rather than what our form of government was founded around. With the overturning of Roe versus Wade, what has happened is the Supreme Court has opened the door for us to leave our children and grandchildren and posterity a political community that is ordered around respecting the vulnerable. It is grounded in the truth that the human person has an inviolable dignity. And that's what we will leave our posterity. But ideologies are not respecters of borders. And the CCP is an existential threat to our way of life and to our great-grandchildren's way of life who are yet conceived and born. So I believe that it is not enough to overturn Roe, to have a human life amendment to the Constitution. It's very important that the CCP is defeated, that we decouple our economy from the CCP, that the Communist Party in China is swept into the dustbin of history, because what we want to leave our posterity is a regime ordered around protecting the vulnerable and grounded in the truth of the human person. What the CCP is, with the Communist Party of China, what the Chinese are suffering under is a regime that is ordered around waging a war against the vulnerable, from the child in the womb to the Uyghur and Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. There are really only two ways to order a political community. There's only two ways to order your family. There's only two ways for you to live as a human. Are you going to order your life to serve the vulnerable, or are you going to order your life to be a slave to the powerful? That's it. I was lying in bed the other day and I was thinking, imagine if when you died on Judgment Day, God looks at you and says, you know, Jason, the problem I have with you is that you serve the vulnerable and were not a respecter of those who are in power. You showed no respect to those who were cruel and violent, and you were wasting your life serving the weak. Could you imagine how bizarre and insane that would be? So it's just foolish to think about it. Close your eyes and imagine if we had a creator that wanted you to kick down, to be a bully, to be vicious and cruel, to exploit the vulnerable, to hurt the weak. The idea of that is you're an atheist, right? You're an atheist, but you close your eyes and you imagine a God on Judgment Day that would judge you for ordering your life to serve those who had no power, that could do nothing for you. And then instead, he demands of us that we serve those who were powerful, that were cruel, that could help or harm us. And then imagine that creator would condemn you because you did not kneel before the powerful and the cruel, but instead serve the weak and the vulnerable. That would be nuts. You wouldn't want to go to that heaven. That heaven would be hell. The CCP is a regime that is organized around violence to the weak, exploitation of the vulnerable, from discarding the elderly, unwanted, to literally othering children, calling them black children or illegitimate children or illegal children, pushing them outside of the realm of civil society, in the political community. They're born there, from there, and they're completely shoved outside of the law, of protection, of hope, of opportunity. That's the CCP. By the way, which the left loves. Do you remember when Obama was president and they had a Mao Zedong Christmas ornament on their Christmas tree? They love Mao, you know. They love totalitarianism because they hate human beings. They're of a reprobate mind. They have no natural human affection for those who are vulnerable. Anyway, that's why I wanted to have Reggie on, because the campaign to protect human life does not stop at our borders. That what we want is to leave our posterity a world grounded in respect for human dignity. We want a global civilization of love and a culture of life. And defeating the CCP is the next big goal for those of us who are pro-life. That we have overturned Roe versus Wade, and now we need to liberate China. I think that is very important. And how do we do that here in America? We work to decouple our economy from the CCP. We elect politicians who are committed to decoupling our economy from the CCP. And politicians who tell us it's not practical or possible, we need to primary them, right? Okay. This episode is being brought to you by Epoch Times. By the way, if you want the Epoch Times is at the vanguard of the battle to liberate China from totalitarian socialism. And so you need to read the Epoch Times. And so you got to go to ireadepoch.com, use the code Jason Jones, and then you are on the team. Then you want the digital and print subscription. This episode is also being brought to you by MyPillow.com. Go to MyPillow.com and use the code Jones for deep discounts on all of Mike Lindell's great products. And we need your support. We are overwhelmed with folks that need our help in Afghanistan, and we are not keeping up with the demand. So if you've been praying or thinking about supporting our work at the Vulnerable People Project, go to thegreatcampaign.org and make the best donation you can, because right now we're having a real hard time making ends meet. It's been a tough year, and up until about 6 weeks ago, we were able to help everyone that is asked. And now we're making very difficult decisions. We're having to triage not only evacuations, which we've been doing, but we're even having to triage basic support. So if you want to work with us, stand with us as we stand with those vulnerable Afghans, go to the Vulnerable People Project. Go to thegreatcampaign.org and make your best donation and check out what we do there. Again, it's been great talking to you. And as I'm talking to you, I'm watching them cut the tree down in front of my house. I don't think you heard it, though. I think when they started the saws going, I asked questions to Reggie, and I think I did it. Email me, let me know at jason@thegreatcampaign.org. Did I do a good job keeping the saws off of the airways? All right, until next time. And by next time, I mean tomorrow. It's been Reggie Littlejohn on The Jason Jones Show.
This has been The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media.